So Ludwig and Otto grew up in their portion of the castle on that side, and they were never allowed to step foot inside the other side of the castle unless they're invited by their father and mother, the king and queen. All right, and that would happen maybe 10 times a year, 20 minutes at a time. All right, so already at a young age, Ludwig and his brother, very distant, growing up distant from their parents. They didn't have much of a relationship with their father or mother. Now, you can imagine being a young prince growing up there on top of that hill, looking down into the village and seeing the children playing down here, but you're not allowed to come play with them. All right, because of that social hierarchy, as a future heir to the throne, as a prince, you can't come and play with the servants' children down here. They did get visitors quite often from other royal families or other noble families who would send out their kids to help strengthen family ties and to give the kids somebody to play with as well. There are two young girls that came out quite frequently, sometimes for the entire summer, by the name of Sophie and Elizabeth. Now, these two young girls grew up to become very important characters in European history later on. If you've been to Vienna and done a tour there, you may have heard them mention the Empress Sisi. All right, that is Elizabeth, Ludwig's cousin. Now, even as a young girl, you can imagine growing up in a royal or noble family, you're expected to behave and act a certain way, always have to look very prim and proper. And as soon as you come out here into the countryside, all of a sudden you can let your hair down and let loose, so to speak. So these four kids would spend hours every day hiking through the forest, going for a swim at the lake just over here. They climb up to the old ruins of that fortress that used to stand where Neuschwanstein is. They would build their own musical instruments and have jam sessions. They would recite poetry to each other and reenact parts of their favorite plays and operas. All right, this is all at the age of 13, 14, 15, mind you. Yeah, stark contrast to what children nowadays are doing at that age. Now, when Ludwig turned 15, his father had a stroke. Right, and he ended up moving out here to Hohenschwangau. He lived in his part of the castle. He would go for daily walks, maybe 30 minutes at a time, just to stretch his legs, get a little bit of fresh air. And it's at this stage that his ministers and advisors go to him and they say, Max, why don't you take Ludwig on these walks with you? Teach him a little bit about the inner workings of the government, of the court, how the kingdom operates. Right, so whether you like it or not, someday Ludwig is going to take that throne and he needs to know how to do exactly that. To which Max II responded, yeah, Ludwig and we have nothing to talk about. So he'd not even take his son on these 30-minute walks that he was taking every single day. When Ludwig turned 18, his father got pneumonia, and within 3 days he was dead. Now all of a sudden Ludwig has been thrust into the seat of power. He's been placed on the throne, expected to rule the kingdom of Bavaria. He does not even have the equivalent of a high school education, and he's never in his life stepped foot inside the court, and he's actually expected to rule the kingdom. Right. Things are already looking pretty grim for young Ludwig II. That is the end of.
I'm gonna go up there.
If you look straight up, there's the castle.
This is the castle that Walt Disney fashioned the one in Disney World.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Snow
and everything. Yeah, it's beautiful.
You guys had it bad. What about those workers? Yeah. Ludwig himself could have easily done with slave labor to build his castles, but he did not. He actually paid his workers a very fair wage. He also gave them a day off a week, and they could choose which day they wanted off. Most people chose Sundays because we're in a predominantly Catholic area here, so they could go to Mass and then spend the rest of the day with their families. All right, he also invented a type of workman's comp, or insurance policy, for these workers. Right, if anybody got sick or injured while they're building one of his castles, he would continue to pay their wage until they're fit to come back to work. If anybody died while building his castle, which 32 people did while building Neuschwanstein, he would continue to pay that worker's wage to the family up until that worker's 60th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. By today's standard, I don't know any company or anybody that does anything along those lines. Otherwise, we'd all be working for them probably. But yeah, it's also believed that Ludwig wasn't able to differentiate in numbers that well, so he really didn't know the difference between 50 and 500. Might explain the way he was spending, why he was spending the money that he did, the way he did. So, to dive back into chapter 2. All right, Ludwig has just taken the throne. He has no experience whatsoever and has absolutely no clue how to run a kingdom. All right, but what he does next is pretty smart. He goes to his father's ministers and advisors and he says, hey, listen, I have no idea what I'm doing here. Why don't you guys continue to advise me? I'll take everything that you say into consideration and I'll make a final decision after that. All right, and that all went swimmingly. It went very smoothly for about 4.5 years. And then something happened that is generally the downfall of any kingdom or any king or empire, and that is a war. Right? A war broke out between the kingdom of Prussia and Austria. Now, Prussia was a very power-hungry kingdom up in the north near where Berlin is now. Always trying to expand constantly at war. And Austria, just over here. Both sides were asking Ludwig to support them. Yeah? And now Ludwig finds himself in another difficult position here. Because on one side, his cousin is now the Empress of Austria. And on the other side, his mother is a Prussian princess. Yeah, so his family on both sides, there's no way this is really going to play out too well for Ludwig. After a lot of deliberation, what he decides to do is have a whole bunch of horse-drawn carriages loaded up with arms and ammunition. He has them driven across the Austrian border. He then leaves them there and just takes a couple steps back. Didn't play out too well for Ludwig because Austria lost that war. The war only lasted 6 months. Austria lost, and Prussia is now furious. They feel like they've been stabbed in the back. Now, after most wars, you have a treaty that is signed. A treaty was signed between Prussia and Bavaria, in which Ludwig was forced to give up half of his autonomy. Half his kingdom, half his wealth. That is a massive blow for a young king. It is at this stage in his life where Ludwig becomes very introverted, reclusive, keeps to himself a lot more. He stops attending any government meetings. And by doing that, he has his first major strike against him. Not attending government meetings, the government essentially running on its own with no head. And in that process, he's created a type of power vacuum. Keep an eye on the time here. We're still good. Sort of power vacuum. In that time, he also picks up hobbies such as building castles. Yeah, as you do. He built several castles. The only one that was actually completed is the Linderhof Palace, which is about 60 kilometers away from here. The Linderhof Palace is referred to by architects and historians as the pleasure seat of the Rococo. Rococo is a style of architecture known for being very opulent, very grandiose, a lot of marble and gold. It's a small palace, but there's a lot going on inside it. Yeah? Just to give you guys an idea of what's happening inside that palace, he had a foul grotto, or a fake cave, built into the side of the mountain underneath the castle. In the middle of that cave, there's a big lake with several canals running off of it. There's murals all around on the walls. All his castles had electricity, so he had different types of lighting inside that cave. Depending on his mood, he could light it up in blue or green or red. There was a stage on the side of the lake, and overlooking all of that was a hot tub. So you could have performances on that stage while laying in this hot tub and enjoy that. He also had a gondola built in the shape of a swan and placed in the middle of the lake. He then brought in a gondolier from Venice who was on call 24/7, just in case Ludwig wanted to go for a boat ride in his basement. His dining room table was on a pulley system that could be lowered down into the kitchen, set by the staff, and then raised back up. Another castle that he had built is called Hidden Chiemsee. It's on an island in the middle of a lake. It was meant to be an exact replica of the Palace of Versailles. It's a pretty impressive palace. Never really was finished, but he does have a hall of mirrors inside that castle, and he has 3 extra mirrors in his, so he's winning in that sense. And then Neuschwanstein. Neuschwanstein was meant to be his personal getaway, his hideout, if you will. A lot of young kids, or even when you were younger maybe, if you were angry at your parents, you would threaten to run away from home. And maybe you'd run into the backyard, climb into your treehouse, or go for a walk in the forest, or a little cave that you like to hide out in, and kind of pout there for a little bit until you get hungry, and then you realize you forgive mom and dad, you're going to go home and get something to eat. This was Ludwig's hideout, his treehouse. This is where he came to escape everything. He's definitely turning his grave right now, knowing how many people come through this castle now. Originally, he met up with a friend of his who was a theater set designer, and they drew up this elaborate plan of a castle that consisted of 250 rooms. Now, there's not that much space on this ledge right up here. The original plan was to cantilever the castle out across the ravine and support it using steel beams. They then took those plans and brought them to an architect and an engineer, and they very quickly got out a big red pen and put a big red X through half the castle and reduced it down to 115 rooms, of which only 17 were completed. 17 years to complete 17 rooms. That's your tour inside is going to go through those 17 rooms. They actually had steam-powered cranes, 2 steam-powered cranes to build this castle as well. New technology back then. All his castles had running water. This Neuschwanstein also had hot water. All right, now to have hot water, you must have a fire. If you have a fire, you must have somebody that's watching that fire. All right, one person's job to watch this fire 24/7, just in case Ludwig comes home and wants to have a warm bath. Now, in building these castles and picking up these various hobbies, Ludwig has essentially blown through 800 years of family wealth accumulation. Yeah, bankrupting his family. And what he does next is quite dangerous, quite foolish. Yeah, instead of waiting for tax money to bring in more money, or borrowing from the state or from a bank, he goes to other families and starts borrowing money from other families. And we talk about that social hierarchy. As a king, you're up here. When you start borrowing from other families, you start bringing them to your level, and you start creating them as equals. Yeah. So he has an eroding power base here at the same time, and he's bankrupted his family. Strike number 2 for Ludwig. Right. Strike number 3 is he has no heir to the throne. Right. When you go inside Ludwig's bedroom here, you'd expect to find the king-size bed. Yeah, it's not. It's a little bit larger than what you would find inside a college dormitory. He was a very tall man. So it's a little bit longer, a little bit wider. But again, it shows us that Ludwig never expected to share this bedroom with anybody else. Yeah. The bed itself took 14 master carpenters 4 years to make. And you'll see why when you go inside there. Now, Ludwig did keep a diary in which he admitted to being a homosexual. Yeah. And again, this just adds to the inner turmoil and struggle that Ludwig is going through as a king. On one side, he's a devout Catholic, and on the other side, well, he's gay. And those two things just don't mix. Yeah. So it's a constant struggle for poor little Ludwig. Yeah, so that's strike number 3. He did have a very close relationship with a man by the name of Richard Wagner, who was a composer. Wagner was going through a sort of quiet or a dry spell in his career. Ludwig was a big fan of his work, so he invited Wagner out to Munich, and he decided to sponsor him, put him up in the residence, in the Royal Palace in Munich. The locals were very unhappy about that. Right? He was already spending all their tax money on these castles. Now he's supporting this man that wasn't very popular with the people either. So actually, Wagner ended up being moved out to Lindenhof Palace. Very close relationship between the two men. Whether it was purely platonic, I couldn't tell you. But Wagner did die before Ludwig. So again, another relationship that's just been cut short for Ludwig. He's lost his only friend in the world on top of everything. Yeah. So there's all these things working against him. And it's at this stage that the ministers and advisors meet up and they start talking amongst themselves. Something needs to be done. All right, the kingdom has been running to the ground. Ludwig is never present. They need to come up with some sort of plan on how to save the kingdom and to save the face of Bulgaria as a kingdom. Yeah. And they hatch a plan on how to do exactly that.
Oh.
All the way out there.
Oh my god.
Snow just fell on my head.
Okay, I'm going to stop now. So you saw the probably was made in the shape of a digital. If you look at this bedroom, looks like the interior of a coffee cup.
Mommy, I'm here to work.
For example, it had running water and doing all of the raw flow, and then keeping natural pressure of the water. So it was like this. There's the water. On the right side in front of the water is the stable.
Taking me.
So now it's the water out of the deep of the floor. Afterwards, just over several hours in the middle of the water. The water went down to the sewer. Sewer closed for small little baby. Left of the water stand is a secret door in there. Behind that door is the fourth floor. Okay, now can come over here so everybody can see. That water stand was big rooms like drawing room, semi-small, all usually quite sophisticated or sophisticated. The smaller rooms are usually guys who guys everything in the bedroom is like that. There's no closed full wall, not to be seen, walls and dining rooms, everything will have to stop that.
Yeah, we've got this. Go ahead. Yeah, but now it's our turn.
don't think this is nice. It wasn't all the way down in the place. You also have the lights for the children. They have to change it. After the first day, last time it's not yet. Then the picture was also missing from the when we're halfway in the second. The second machine you see for children. 1880.
Yeah, it's still not fun, right? Pretty cool. The stalactites are the ceiling stalagmites on the floor. That's nice. That's a nice view.
Another swan.
Another.
First time.
Look at that view.
Look at that bridge.
Yeah, I got that before as well, yeah. And look at the mountain though, there's like a little cave inside it.
That's some amazing views in this castle.
This
Look at all the copper pots.
They're all made out of copper.
Look at the please don't touch the exhibits.
This part is okay to film in. And then here's the Stadia. There you go.
Oh, you're recording?
Say hi. It's okay to record here, I think.
Hi. Stop.
Wait, Lydia. Will there be a part 1 and a part 2 to this video?
I don't know.
Yes, there will be, because it's gonna be super long. Oh, this is the running water right here.
Check out his copper plug collection.
Look at this guy right here, Swan. Is this a sink? Is this a sink? The sink is huge. Here's more copper stuff. Ooh, over here's some silver stuff. Over here is a bed and some notes.
Oh, this is what it was going to be if it was finished, right?
Yeah, because there's the tower up there.
I don't think this is connected.
This piece here is there.
Yeah, look up there, yeah.
It would have been bigger than this. Twice the size, but.
Following the leader, the leader, the leader, following the leader. Gift shop.
You can get a swan made in. More stairs.
Hey, what do you know? More stairs. That is a, oh my gosh, dude, this is a long staircase. Let's go. Really?
We're all painted the same color. Oh my god, you shouldn't see the exit.
What? This is bizarre.
Imagine this was like Halloween. This would be a haunted house. Jesus Christ, what's going on?
Dad already went on. Dad already went on. He's already down. He's outside, but he's getting the carriage for us. He's getting. Oh wait, I was recording too. I forgot I was recording. Yeah.
Ludwig has all these strikes going against him. He's bankrupted his family, he's created a power vacuum, has eroded power base, and he has no heir to the throne. Yeah? The ministers and advisors realize they need to do something, and it's not easy to get a king off the throne. There's only two ways that you can actually get a king off the throne, and that is either through death or by proving that he's clinically insane. Right? You can't just go up to a king and say, "Hey, buddy, thanks a lot for your efforts. We think we're going to try somebody else for a little bit now." Right? That's not how that works. And so they decided to prove that Ludwig was clinically insane. Right? His uncle Ludwig took it upon himself to see to exactly that. He spent the next several years walking through the countryside here, hours at a time, through the villages, talking to the locals, the villagers, trying to collect anecdotes or stories that would prove that Ludwig was insane. Now, some of these stories don't really prove anything at all. Others a little bit harder to explain away. Some of those stories would include that Ludwig would insist on dining outside when it was cold. He would wear a very heavy coat on warm days, and he would disappear late at night on horseback and not return till morning. All right, none of those things actually define craziness. Another story was that he would have sent out invitations to 15, 20 people and have his servants deck out the banquet hall. He'd then seat down all his guests and start talking to every single one of them in their respective languages. Yeah? So in German, French, English, Italian, you name it. Right? The only problem is that he was sitting at the table entirely alone. There was nobody else at the table. Right? He was sending out invitations to the likes of Louis XIV, William Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. Right? People that had been dead for quite some time already. Yeah. A little bit harder to explain away. Whether it's true or not, I couldn't tell you exactly. Now, all these stories were compiled into a portfolio and then presented to a team of 4 psychologists, all right, who were then asked to declare Ludwig insane. They went ahead and did exactly that, even though not a single one of them had ever stepped foot in the same room as Ludwig at any stage in their entire lives. Big ethical dilemma already going on there. A police force was then dispatched from Munich to come out to Friesen and up to Neuschwanstein to arrest Ludwig. All right, the local police force outnumbered the Munich police force. They showed up in their numbers. They were still loyal to the king. They in turn arrested the Munich police force and put them into cells. All right. Then the following morning, Ludwig was then informed of exactly what had happened. Naturally, he was a little bit upset. He knew something was going to happen, though. He knew something was in the works. He didn't know exactly what or how it was going to go down. But he frantically started writing letters to his allies, and messengers were sent out in every direction, of which, well, one of them made it out of the surrounding area. All the others were cut off before they actually made it out of the forest surrounding Neuschwanstein Castle. Right. He then went to the Munich police force and sent them back to his uncle with a very stern warning. He said, "Go back to my uncle, tell him what he's doing is not good. Tell him it's high treason, and I won't look too kindly upon it. You should never let this happen again." And he let them go. Right. Mistake, obviously. They delivered the message. Luitpold did not heed that warning, obviously. He came back the following evening with a military in tow, along with a portfolio in hand, and he himself as well. They went up and very theatrically arrested Ludwig in his bedroom. You guys saw the bed that I was talking about? You can see why that took 4 years to make. They then brought him back to Lake Starnberg, which is a lake that's about a 30-minute train ride south of Munich, right, to Bergschloss, a family-owned castle there. The official report that they put out to the public was that they were going to rehabilitate Ludwig. He wasn't feeling too well, but he should be able to resume the throne in about a year. Obviously, that was never really the plan. The following evening, Ludwig and the main doctor, Van Guten, decided to go for a walk around the lake. The plan is to be back in time for dinner around 6:37 p.m. By 10 p.m. they still hadn't returned, and search parties were sent out to look for them. They searched all through the night, into the following day, into the following night, at which stage they found these 2 seemingly healthy men dead on the banks of Lake Starnberg, with their feet in the water and their shoulders in the sand. About 100 meters away from the castle itself, in plain view of several windows, and in an area where that search party would have passed by several times while they were out looking for them. Things aren't adding up already. Now, what actually happened, we don't know. We might never know. Not in our lifetime anyways. The autopsy is not public information. They actually voted in Parliament. It was either at the beginning of this year or end of last year. They voted whether to make that public information or not, and it was voted down. I don't entirely know why, but that Wittelsbach family that these rulers came from is still a real family. They still exist today. Right? They're a very powerful and wealthy and influential family. Right? It is still relatively recent history. You can't just start pointing fingers at families like that and saying, hey, yeah, you guys committed murder. It also adds an air of mystery to the area. And it's good for tourism.
When is the bus coming?
Sorry? The bus, where you have to walk down to the bus in a moment.
Oh. I thought the bus was driving to us.
No, we have to walk down.
I know.
I'm wrapping up, just give me a second. Where was I? Yeah, so we don't know what happened. The doctor, we do know that Ludwig died 20 minutes before the doctor did because they had pocket watches, and once those hit water, obviously they stopped working. Yeah. A lot of different theories about what happened. I'll give you two stories. One was that Ludwig and the doctor were walking around the lake, and Ludwig was overtaken by a sense of remorse for having bankrupted his family and putting his kingdom through so much strife that he decided to commit suicide in about that much water. Right. The doctor, upon seeing the death of his beloved king, decided to commit suicide in the same puddle next to him. Yeah. Another story is that there's an elaborate escape plan in place where there's a fisherman that was loyal to Ludwig on the lake, ready to ferry him across the lake to a stable that usually only had 3 horses in it. On that particular evening, had 10 horses. There was a struggle between Ludwig and the doctor. Ludwig broke free, ran for the boat, was shot twice in the back, and died. Now the doctor has just witnessed the murder of a royal family member. Yeah, so you need to tie up those loose ends. And the bodies were then positioned where they were. A bit more plausible, but again, we don't know the actual story. Now that Ludwig has vacated the throne, who's next in line to take power? Sorry? Not yet. He still has a little brother, remember? Otto. Little Otto takes the throne. And he was on the throne for a total of, we'll say, 8 hours. All right? He was actually clinically insane. He went through 3 different wars between the age of 15 and 23. So he had PTSD, he was schizophrenic, and had syphilis. Right, so a sick young man. He was brushed aside, and now that paved the way for the uncle to take power. Now the uncle is a king in everything except for name. You can't call him a king because he's not the rightful king. Yeah, so he's now named Prince Regent Luitpold. Right, a name that you'll see a lot in Munich and out here. Luitpold is now head of the family and head of the state. The very first thing he does, quite clever actually, is as head of the family, he takes all the castles that Ludwig has built and he sells them to himself as head of the state, thereby regaining all the money for the family that Ludwig had spent. The family is no longer bankrupted and the state has incurred this debt. All right, the state now has this debt, but they also own all the castles. All right, if the castles are state-owned, they are public property. All right, so within 6 weeks of Ludwig's death in 1886, all the castles were opened up as museums to the public and have been so ever since. On a busy day in the summer, 6,000 people go through that castle. 1.6 million people visit this castle every year. And the bridge on the other side of the castle, actually the highest concentration of any photo of any landmark anywhere in the world is from that bridge looking at the castle. Mostly because of the size of the bridge, it's pretty tiny. But yeah, was Ludwig insane? I couldn't tell you. I don't think so. I think it's just ahead of his time. A little eccentric. But that's for you guys. And that is the story of Ludwig. For you guys.
My pleasure.